Sorry about this.
It happens. It's
There we go. Okay.
awesome.
All right. So, where is emerald ash borer in Maine? Unlike a lot of our other neighboring states and provinces, we have relatively little EAB in Maine so far that we know of, and we do a lot of monitoring for it. So far, we found it up north in this the northern corner of Aroostook County around Madawaska, Maine. Madawaska, and then down in southern Maine. The infestation up north is a relatively small point infestation that is growing relatively slowly because it was just one small point that is expanding. That eventually is going to change, but for now it's growing relatively slowly. Down south, we are the leading edge of this massive juggernaut that's coming in from New Hampshire. And so it's spreading pretty quickly down south. In the last 2 years, it's gone from one or two little red points where we found it to a whole bunch. And actually there is, this is where we have it in southern Maine. And as of last Thursday, we found 2 new sites in Saco and Westbrook. So this is getting filled in quite a bit, and you guys are sort of outside the quarantine zone. We haven't, most of you guys up in the Oxford area, we have not found it there, but it's definitely moving your direction. So I want to sort of let you guys know things to look out for and things that you can do to help monitor and prepare. So I want to talk a little bit about the EAB quarantine. Some of you may have heard that the federal government, that APHIS has gotten out of has deregulated emerald ash borer, and so they're no longer administering the quarantine. However, the state is taking that quarantine over. So the quarantine covers all things that are true ash, not mountain ash. So it's all roundwood, green lumber, any chipped materials that has ash in it, all hardwood firewood if it hasn't undergone certified heat treatment, and then any rooted ash or any nursery stock. So just because these things are regulated does not mean they can never move from inside the quarantine zone to outside the quarantine zone. In general, there are things that you can do. You can enter into an agreement with the state and meet certain requirements, which may mean that you can move things out of the quarantine zone. With the exception of nursery stock, there is nothing you can do to a rooted ash tree, a nursery stock tree, that makes it safe to move out of the quarantine zone. But for the other things, there are things that you can do, and so the idea of a quarantine is to allow trade to carry on while minimizing the chance so allow ash to move around while minimizing the chance that emerald ash borer will move around with it. So as I mentioned, the state is taking over the quarantine zone, or the quarantine of emerald ash borer in Maine. And we are currently in the process of changing the quarantine area up north, expanding it slightly. And so there is a comment period, which is ongoing now. If you go to maine.gov/EAB, it's right there on our front page, links to the different possible scenarios and where you can enter comments. Also, there is a public hearing in about 1 week on the 16th of March. So if you are at all interested in the quarantine, you are certainly welcome to participate and make your comments known. So how have we been detecting emerald ash borer in Maine? Up north, we found it primarily with purple traps, which are these little purple triangles in the first year. After that, we found it almost exclusively using girdled ash trap trees. And I will talk to you a little bit later about what those are. Down south, we've had just about every possible way to find emerald ash borer. We have found that way. There's no silver bullet for finding EAB. It's not like something like gypsy moth where you can put on a pheromone trap and you can attract them in from miles away. There's not any one really good way to monitor for EAB. So we use girdled trap trees. We use the purple prism traps that you guys have probably seen hanging in trees. We also use a green funnel trap. We use visual detection, and that is something that as EAB is spreading further into the state and has been here a longer time and our trees are starting to decline a little bit, that is becoming more and more prevalent, that we're just, we're able to see them as we drive down the roads, or woodlot owners and landowners are noticing them and calling into us. We also do branch sampling, where we take branches off of trees and peel the bark off of them looking for EAB. And then we also use biosurveillance, which is this very cool little wasp that tends to, non-stinging wasp that lives in, tends to live in baseball diamonds and hunts emerald ash borer, as well as other related beetles. So those are all different ways, and in southern Maine, every single one of those methods has been used to find EAB. So girdled trap trees. Sorry, were you saying something?
I mean, it's in.
Okay. So girdled trap trees, one of our most powerful and effective ways of finding EAB, we tend to find it relatively early on. Often we have found it a year, 2 years, maybe even more before the trees start showing any signs of EAB. So it's a good way of getting a bit of an early warning. And how a girdled trap tree works is in the spring, the landowner or we will peel the bark off of an ash tree all the way around for anywhere between a foot or 2 or 3 feet even. And we don't cut into the heartwood, so the tree stays alive. It still is getting water up from the roots, but it is it's stressed. And because of that stress, it releases these stress volatiles into the air. And any emerald ash borer that are right in that immediate area, instead of going to random ash trees, they will come to that ash tree. Then in the fall, we cut that tree down, we peel the bark off of it and look for signs of emerald ash borer. It is not something that, this is not a method that will bring EAB into your property, like say a Japanese beetle trap, like draw more Japanese beetles onto your property. This cannot bring them in from any great distance. It's just that if they are already there, it actually will act as a way of almost protecting the neighboring ash trees, because instead of going to the neighboring ash trees, they will come to this ash tree. And so we are encouraging landowners and woodlot owners, anybody who has ash trees on their property, ash trees that they're willing to sacrifice. Often we have towns that get involved with this. If it's an ash tree and you think, yeah, when emerald ash borer comes here, I'm not going to be treating that tree with a pesticide. That's a tree that I'm willing to get rid of. Or that's a problem tree, I want to get rid of it. We'll girdle it in the spring and then cut it down in the fall. Or it's a tree I want to cut down for firewood. We've had landowners do that, and they'll girdle it in the spring, and we get to use it as a trap tree and as a way of monitoring for EAB, and then they use it as firewood in the fall. So if you are at all interested, feel free to email me, colleen.teerling@maine.gov, or if you go to that link that Michael gave you in the chat, there's a way there to sign up for more information. So we're definitely looking for people that are interested in doing that this spring. Other ways we monitor is we have purple traps, which we hang in trees, and we also have green funnel traps that we hang in ash trees. The purple traps, we don't have a lot of leeway in where we put them. They need to go in places that are specifically, specifically for part of a whole statewide grid. The green traps, though, we do have green traps, and we are very happy if to give them out to cooperators. Anybody who's interested in hanging one of these in their tree. The downside of a green trap is that every 2 weeks somebody needs to, or our cooperator would need to lower it down from the tree, take off that little cup at the bottom, and empty out the insects and stick them in the freezer and replace the cup. So there's a little bit of servicing that needs to be done every 2 weeks. But if you're at all interested in that, again, contact either Jan or me, and we are looking for cooperators who would be willing to service a trap every couple of weeks over the summer. The other ways that you could look for EAB is just looking for woodpecker activities. Woodpeckers are way better than we are at finding emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer are underneath the bark, and an EAB, or sorry, a woodpecker will peck through the bark and pull out the larva. And as they're doing that, they tend to flick off all this sort of brown, dark brown outer bark and leave this sort of bright blonde underbark showing. And that very distinctive pattern is often a good way of telling whether emerald ash borer is there. So if you happen to see that kind of blonding, I mean, this is really heavy here. This tree is in a bad way. If you see that, then we know EAB's probably been there quite a while. But if you see less, something more along the lines of this, it could well be EAB. So if you do see that, please give us a call, and we may have you peel back the bark a little bit if you can. Otherwise, we may have one of our technicians peel back the bark in a little area of the tree just to see whether it's emerald ash borer that the woodpeckers are going after or one of our native beetles. The other thing that we are seeing, so the woodpecker feeding is one of the most common things that we are seeing. But the other thing that we're seeing is this epicormic growth, which is basically unnatural growth. So as the tree is starting to get stressed and the EAB is kind of girdling the ash tree underneath the bark up here, the tree is kind of putting up this last ditch effort to survive by putting all this growth out from the main trunk. And sometimes we also do see bark splitting. And then if you do peel back the bark, you can see the EAB galleries. This is the EAB itself, the younger ones, and then the older ones as they get a little bit larger. This is what a single gallery looks like. When you don't have a lot of EAB, the galleries are very nice and sinuous and S-shaped, very distinctive. When you get a lot of EAB, and we're starting to see this in a few places down in southern Maine, where EAB are just everywhere, all over the place, and they kind of lose that nice, discrete S-shaped, and then they're just sort of going everywhere they can to try to find any kind of camium that hasn't been eaten yet. So if you do see galleries under the bark of your ash trees, if you can take a picture of that, I can usually identify whether something is emerald ash borer or whether it's one of our native species just from a photograph of these galleries. So taking a picture is a great thing to do, to send it in.
Colleen, quick question from the
Yes.
chat. Just asking if that picture in particular you had with the heavy blonding, is that something we're seeing yet here in Maine?
Yes, in one or two places we have seen this. There are places in southern Maine that the trees are probably, they're definitely declining heavily, and will probably be dying within a year or two, is my guess. So yeah, I've seen just a little bit of this really heavy blonding. So again, this is what emerald ash borer looks like. Just a quick refresher. It's small. Sometimes you see a really good picture of it and you think, oh, it's quite big, but it's not. It's a really tiny little insect. You could pretty much fit two of them end to end across a penny. And just as a comparison, this is a tiger beetle, which is also brilliant green. And it tends to move a whole lot faster and flies a lot. If you do see something bright metallic green, if you can get a picture of it or if you can capture it and send us a picture, I can identify it for you. But just be aware that there are other brilliant metallic green things out there. So what are we doing for EAB? We have the quarantine, which is one of the most important things we could do is just slow down the spread of emerald ash borer. It is probably, we're not going to eradicate it from the state, and we're not even going to prevent it from ever getting all throughout the state. It will eventually get throughout the state. But if we can slow down the spread, that is really, really huge. because it allows us to do things like biological control. It allows us to do other things to manage manage our forests, manage the trees in towns. And it means that we can manage this in a reasonable, organized way rather than having chaos and huge expense. So biological control is one of the big things we're doing. At the beginning, right now, we're putting out biocontrol in relatively small numbers, but there are woodpeckers out there, which is a really good form of biocontrol at the beginning of an infestation. And at the beginning of an infestation, an EAB can cause over 90% mortality in emerald ash borer in individual trees. But once EAB has been here for a while and the numbers of EAB tend to rise, woodpeckers just can't keep up. So early on, it's a good form of biocontrol. So since woodpeckers aren't going to do it all, once EAB gets out there in the millions and billions of individuals, we are releasing these 3 tiny little parasites. You probably hear us talking about parasitic wasps, and we probably shouldn't call them parasitic wasps because people hear the word wasp and they think hornet or yellow jacket, and that's not what these are. The vast majority of wasps out there cannot sting at all, and these are non-stinging. They cannot sting. So if you think about how tiny emerald ash borer is, now here it is sitting on a penny. And so if this is the size of emerald ash borer, these are the size of the 3 little parasites that we're releasing. So they're really tiny. This is the smallest one. It's an egg parasite. And you see this little speck, not this one here, but this one up here. That's what we call a wasp. So that's a teeny, teeny, tiny little parasite that lays its eggs in the eggs of emerald ash borer. This one here, and I was supposed to have a circle around it, which seems to have disappeared. Hope you can see my cursor. This here is one called Tetrasticus planopenisi, and it's a great little parasite, and it actually will follow emerald ash borer as EAB spreads. We release this at sort of kind of a ground zero where we find EAB, and then as EAB spreads, this little wasp will follow with it, and this little parasite will spread with it. And so we're really encouraged about this. So this is the one that we have been releasing down south. The other 2, this one and the egg parasite, we've been releasing up north for a couple of years, and we did not get that one for the southern area this year. But next year we will have all 3 species to release. So we will release this one as well, and here's this one. This one is a little bit bigger. It has a longer ovipositor. People look at that and they think, oh, it's a stinger. It's actually not. For the vast majority of wasps, these are egg layers. And so they use it to kind of scissor its way in under the bark. They'll hear or feel emerald ash borer underneath the bark, and they will very carefully drill through the bark and lay their egg right on an emerald ash borer. And then those eggs will hatch and eat the EAB alive from the inside, which is a rather grisly death for emerald ash borer, but I'm all for them. And so these 3 are 3 insects that we are releasing where we find stands that have EAB. We cannot release them until we know EAB is in an ash stand. And so because these things, they have to have EAB to live. If there's no EAB, they'll die. And so one of the ways that we have been finding most of our sites for releasing these parasites is actually through our girdled trap tree program. Because when we will put out a girdled trap tree in somebody's stand of ash, and as soon as we find EAB, then that goes on our list, that stand. If it has enough ash, we need at least a couple of acres of ash, maybe 25% or more, and hopefully connectivity to other areas of ash in the region. And if it meets those criteria, then we'll put it on the list, and as soon as the parasites are available, we will hopefully be able to release the parasites in those areas. So this is something that we're doing. Up north, where we were able to get the parasites out right away, and it's a smaller infestation of EAB. I am surprised that the trees are still looking really healthy 3 years later, and there's not that much growth of emerald ash borer. And we fell a couple of trees, and there's just not that many EAB there because the parasites are helping to keep it under control. These parasites are almost certainly not going to save all of the standing trees now, but the next generation of seedlings that are growing up, there is a lot of evidence in places where they've been doing this longer than we have, that biocontrol is fairly effective in protecting the emerald or the next generation of trees growing up from emerald ash borer. So this is something that we can do for the future. Let's see, how's my time doing? I should need to be finishing up here. So I'll just very briefly talk about pesticides. There are pesticides that can be used to save individual trees. It's not something we're going to do in the forest because you need to use a soil drench or a truck injection or even a basil bark spray. But it's something that you can do if you have trees in your town or on your yard that you want to protect. And there is, again, here on that maine.gov/EAB, there's a great little booklet that's been put out that gives a lot of what the options are. If you're a woodlot owner and EAB is right on your doorstep, you may want to start taking out some of your more valuable ash trees, but we really don't recommend that people take all the ash trees off of their property. We really want to maintain ash on the tree, on the landscape. And I will not talk about girdled ash trees.
You have plenty of time, Colleen. Feel free to go into that.
Okay.
Yep, you're good.
So I also want to just say, for you guys up in Oxford County, you're sort of here at time zero here. In places like Portland and where are we? Portland and southern York County, we're starting to get to this point here where EAB is just about to take off, and the trees are about to start dying. This green here, or no, this is EAB numbers, and so they, in southern Maine, they're having to respond to EAB and make a decision about what they're going to do and how they're going to manage it. But for up in the Oxford County, you're still sort of here in the prevention. Don't move firewood, don't move ash products out of the quarantine area. Prepare, and Jan's going to talk a little bit more about what towns can do to prepare. And so this is sort of kind of where we are. And then afterwards, we're not here yet. Well, other states are, but afterwards. When a lot of the mature ash trees have died, the EAB population is going to crash and just sort of kind of go bouncing along at really low levels. This is when the biological control is going to be really effective as that next generation of trees grows up and the EAB numbers are relatively low. So again, Jen is probably going to talk more about this.
Quick question, Colleen, from the chat. Yeah. Wondering if parasites overwinter, or do you have to treat the trees again the next year?
Oh, no, they definitely overwinter. So there are millions and millions of emerald ash borer out there. We're releasing these parasites by the thousands, by the hundreds, or by the thousands. So the idea is we put out small numbers of these parasites, and they just build up year after year. So they have about 2 or 3 generations a year. So their numbers can build up within a year. And then they overwinter in the emerald ash borer under the bark of the tree. And then the following spring, they have another 2 or 3 generations. So the numbers build up and build up and build up. And then as EAB spreads, the parasites will spread as well with them. So yeah, that's a very good question. And then preparing for EAB, Jan, I'm sure is going to talk a little bit more about this, but towns, I know some of the towns up on Oxford County do have an emerald ash borer management plan. Things like knowing where your ash are, knowing where out-of-state firewood may be coming in, and you know, in Western Maine, you're right next to uh, New Hampshire, and then also down in southern Maine, where there's risk of firewood coming in and moving emerald ash borer. Monitoring and detecting, that's really important. And then, you know, as a town, figuring out, you know, how you might remove trees, how you might replace trees, which trees you might save. And there's research that shows that pesticide treatments can actually sometimes be cheaper than tree removal. A lot of information here. You don't need to worry about this. Just go to maine.gov/EAB, and Michael has put that link in the chat. And so the only thing I want to mention here is don't kiss your ash goodbye. We really do want people to keep ash on the landscape. Leaving small diameter ash might help slow the spread of EAB. Keeping ash and ash seed on the landscape as long as possible is really important. It's going to help biological control be more effective. And there is also resistance, especially in white ash. And there's more resistance than we thought there was. And so things are not quite as bleak as we thought it would be. And we want to keep our ash on the landscape to give us some options. And that is the end of that. Now I had a quick 3-minute video. Should I show that now, or should I wait till after Jan is done? Jan, what would you prefer?
Go right ahead, Colleen.
Okay. All right.
Quick question while you're setting that up.
Yeah.
Why does the smaller diameter ash, oh, lost the chat function here. Give me a second.
Why does smaller diameter ash slow the spread?
Yep, you got it.
So a big tree will have just a huge amount of phloem and can support thousands and thousands of EAB. And a small diameter tree just can't produce that much EAB. There might be some evidence too that younger trees are a little bit more vigorously growing and a little less susceptible to EAB. The smaller trees are also more easily protected by the parasites. So there's just sort of a lot of reasons to keep the younger ash on the landscape. And I just want to show this. This is this shows you some of what we're seeing in southern Maine in terms of the symptoms we're seeing for EAB. You seeing it? Yeah. Hi, I'm Colleen Teerling, and I'm an entomologist with the Maine Forest Service, and I work with emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is spreading from the southernmost part of the state and the northernmost part of the state where it is established. When you see this kind of woodpecker feeding, it usually is due to emerald ash borer. So when woodpeckers feed on insects in the bark or underneath the bark, they often will flick off the outer bark, and this leaves the bright blonde inner bark visible. And in ash trees, this becomes a very distinctive pattern and is easy to see as the bright blonde bark shows up against the darker outer bark. If you can peel back the bark enough to see what kind of insect galleries or tracks there are, or any insects that are available, you should be able to tell whether it's emerald ash borer or some other species. So emerald ash borer galleries are sinuous S-shaped galleries. When there's only one or two emerald ash borer, you can easily see that typical S-shaped gallery. When there's a lot of emerald ash borer, they tend to crisscross over each other, and you just see a maze of galleries. If the woodpeckers are feeding on native bark beetles, which overwinter in the bark, the holes usually only go partway down the bark. So if you peel back the bark and the hole stops partway through the bark, then you know it is not emerald ash borer. So we are not looking for deep woodpecker holes like these pileated woodpecker holes. We're looking more for surface feeding just under the bark. When you're out walking in your woodlot in the winter, there are several signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer that you can be looking for. The woodpecker feeding damage is probably the most commonly seen one in Maine, but there are also other things like epicormic growth or water sprouts. We also sometimes will see cracks in the bark. This is because as the EAB feeds underneath the bark tends to dry out and crack. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about emerald ash borer, go to our website. If you are in an area where emerald ash borer is not known to be, if you see any of these signs and symptoms, please give us a call. Thanks a lot for helping us monitor for emerald ash borer. Sorry, thinning. You probably want to keep your trees as healthy and vigorous as possible. So in that case, thinning might be worthwhile. But there's a few things to think of. If you're only going to go into your stand once in the next 5 years and EAB is only 5 or 10 miles away, or known EAB infestation is only 5 or 10 or 15 miles away, you might want to harvest anything that will give you value so you don't have to go back in a year or so. So there's a lot of sort of general forest management things to think about. But in general, keeping your trees healthy and vigorous is going to help a little bit, but it's not going to protect them entirely from EAB. So you'd have to sort of weigh the costs of going in more than once. And somebody like Mike would probably be able to talk to you a little bit more about forest management.
Yeah, it's particularly in specific cases. If you happen to be a landowner, I'm always happy to get out and take a look and maybe help you work through some of those questions and maybe put you in touch with a consultant to get a management plan going, or at least bounce some ideas off of them. Some of the concerns you might have are market saturation, right? As emerald ash borer moves through areas and people start harvesting a lot of their ash, a lot of the mills can get flooded. But at the same token, as Colleen said, as things progress, we learn more and more. There is good survival rate, and we've made mistakes in the past with removing species when, in fact, hereafter, we know that some of them will stick around. So kind of hard questions to give you a single answer to, but always happy to get out with you or answer questions if you have them. So I'll share my contact and feel free to reach out. That's it for specific questions at the moment. Thank you, Colleen. That was awesome. That was a good refresher for me too. And I hope, everyone got something from it. I certainly did. But next I'll turn to Jan. As mentioned earlier, Jan's the coordinator for Project Canopy here in the state, works with the Maine Forest Service, and I'll leave it to her. Thanks, Jan.
Okay, you seeing my screen now?
I am. Yep.
I'm just going to start the PowerPoint. There, okay. I would add to that question as well. I believe linked directly on the maine.gov/EAB website, there is an information sheet specific to forest landowners about considerations for forest management in preparation for EAB, or once EAB has arrived on site, and it echoes the comments that both Colleen and Mike made. So again, my name's Jan Santerre. Hang on here. There, okay. And I am the Maine Forest Service Project Canopy Director, and I know several of you folks that are on the Zoom call tonight, but for those of you that don't know me or what Project Canopy does, it is the state's urban and community forestry program. We assist primarily cities and towns, but also schools and nonprofit organizations like land trusts with education, technical assistance, and grants to help guide management of urban and community tree and forest resources. So this is a program that is available to those types of landowners to assist with preparation for emerald ash borer. We also have our stewardship program, which can help private landowners with management planning. So there are resources at the Maine Forest Service for everybody that's on the call if preparation for EAB and management planning is something that you want to do. And before I talk about some specific strategies for preparing for EAB, some of those available resources at the Maine Forest Service are things like a sample municipal EAB management plan. We have a guide for homeowners in looking at saving high value ash, preparation checklists, what you need to be ready for, links to the state licensed arborists and pesticide applicators. We have guidelines for managing wood waste. Colleen mentioned that. Again, that guidance for forest landowners. We have a couple of information sheets on ash management. And I know that those information sheets are a couple years out of date, and I believe we're planning on updating those this year. As we learn more with any type of infestation, the science changes, and our management recommendations are you know, adapting with that. And then we also have, you know, links to contacts for people like Colleen, our forest entomologists, field foresters like Michael Richard, planners such as myself, educators, and more. And then also links to possible grants that we might have available for conducting some of this work. So from a municipal perspective, or even, you know, any public landowner, when you're managing anything, it doesn't matter if it's for EAB, you know, it could just be your budget. You need to know first what you have in order to be able to plan for the future. So in order to plan for what will happen with EAB, you need first an inventory of what your public trees are, ideally a complete inventory of all of your trees, but at the very minimum, an inventory of your ash specifically. And then on top of that, you need to have a good understanding of what the resources are available to help in managing that, the ash resource. So, you know, what volunteer groups are available and interested in helping out? What are your staffing capacities to deal with stuff? Tree-related policies. A lot of communities, organizations have policies related to trees, you know, regarding cutting, regarding pesticide treatment. You need to have a good catalog of what those things are, because they will impact you when you need to do something. Do you have local consulting arborists that are well prepared for this? Again, pesticide applicators, and are they providing treatment? And then something a lot of folks tend not to consider is emergency management. Do you have, you know, large trees that could impact travel ways in the event of an emergency, or if we have, you know, a major storm and we have EAB impacted ash trees, and we're going to have a lot of trees down in the road all of a sudden when we have a big windstorm or ice storm? Something to consider. Coordination with your local emergency management folks. And also, like Colleen said, you know, understanding pathways where the EAB is likely to arrive from will also help you address the potential for damage. You need to determine what your timeline is for management. Colleen put up that great graph of the EAB infestation timeline. Most folks in Western Maine, Oxford, Franklin County are in, you know, that year zero. I know there's a few folks on here from other Southern Maine communities, and you're in that, you know, 0 to 5 year window. But what are you going to do first? What's your timeline? Are you going to attempt to preserve significant ash? We have many beautiful landscape ash around the state that are worthwhile to preserve. And are you able and interested in providing treatment for those? What's your plan for removals? Again, how will that infested wood be disposed of or utilized? There are also, sawmills that would be interested in using that wood, and it's perfectly good wood to use if treated properly. And then are you going to make any effort to replant those trees once lost? Again, we have that sample EAB management plan on our website, and it outlines most of these things that you need to consider for planning for the future. And additionally, Project Canopy does have grants, again, for those public institutions to develop inventory and management plans. So there are cost share available. And I encourage you, if you're interested in that, to just reach out. In the forest, we have a good overall umbrella assessment of what the ash resource looks like for the entire state. And we know that ash in Western Maine is primarily composed of white ash and green ash. And that composition looks fairly similar. I'm sorry, I said green ash, I meant black ash. Green ash is not detected through our FIA information for Western Maine. But that ash resource looks very similar to what we have in the rest of the state. Overall, ash composes roughly 2 to 3% of total trees in the forest, which doesn't sound like an overwhelming amount. But when you start looking at the individual trees in just even this Western Maine region, when you look at the total numbers, you're looking at over 40 million ash trees in our forests of Western Maine. Again, those are mostly white ash, which is a positive thing. As Colleen pointed out, white ash does show some promising signs of being a little bit more resilient than green ash or black ash, but there are black ash there as well. In our municipal settings, that can look very different. In a lot of communities, ash was a common replacement for elm when we lost our elms to Dutch elm disease. So in some communities, you can have much higher numbers of ash.
Jan, now would be a good time to that point. There's a question in the chat. Is there any plan to monitor the ash at UMO that were planted in the early 80s? Specifically, it sounds like to replace the elms that were lost.
That has been a topic of conversation. In fact, I was just on the phone with Mike Parisio yesterday, and we were talking about that. We have been monitoring it. Orono is kind of in the middle of the state at this point and pretty far away from known EAB locations, so there's no effort to begin treating those trees at this point. But it is on our radar, both from at the Maine Forest Service as well as at the university. So I'm sure that some effort will be made to certainly preserve most of those trees, or at least the ones that are in good condition.
And we have often put traps in those trees on the mall, because that also becomes an outreach thing there as well. Yeah,
it's a good educational opportunity. People always want to know what the purple traps are. Just throwing this up here, this is a product out of Purdue, free to use, but once a community does have an inventory of their ash trees, that data can be imported into this EAB cost calculator, and as well as some information about tree removal costs and treatment costs. And this cost calculator is a good tool to spit out what some rough budget numbers might look like for your community. It's worth noting, though, that this is designed for street and park trees rather than in a forested setting. So Colleen mentioned a number of these things in her presentation, so I won't labor too much on them, but there's been this approach that's been developed in the Midwest in places where there's far more ash trees, as well as much heavier concentrations of emerald ash borer. And this management approach is called SLAM, slowing ash mortality. And this approach integrates these 4 available tools and tactics as appropriate for your site to help slow EAB population growth and to delay the onset of ash mortality. It's designed to prevent catastrophic ash mortality and reduce the ecological, economic, and social impacts of the emerald ash borer infestation. I won't talk about biological control or the girdled ash trees because Colleen did touch on those, but I will speak a little bit to the targeted ash removal and insecticide treatment. So for targeted ash removal, this becomes a cost balance of ash insecticide treatment and removal and replacement of infested trees. Potential trees for removal, as Colleen mentioned, are those that have poor form, are already demonstrating that they are hazardous. They may already have EAB and have some canopy thinning. They're in poor locations, and you know, any other reasons. You may want to remove some of the ash from your community. Ideally, you want to target, if you already have EAB in the area, you want to target those trees that have greater than 30% of canopy thinning already, because anything greater than 30% canopy thinning is unlikely to recover with the use of some of the pesticide treatments. And again, here the goal is to start to transition the tree canopy in your community into what you want it to be after the EAB invasion has moved through, and you've moved through that initial wave of large numbers of EAB and where you're losing large numbers of your ash trees. And for those of you in Oxford, you're in year 0. There's nothing about this approach that says that you shouldn't start now. You can start now, and I encourage communities to start looking at trees that they're going to want to remove now to help assist in spreading out their budget and reducing the stark impact of losing all of your trees at once. Insecticide treatments, we have the ability, a lot of folks don't like insecticides, but we have the ability to protect those individual high value landscape ash trees throughout the course of the EAB invasion, and they can remain on the landscape long term. Protecting individual ash trees can also help protect trees that have not been treated. There have been good research models that have been done in other areas where, you know, places like the University Mall, where you have, 100% composition of ash, where you can treat just every other tree with insecticides, and it thereby ends up protecting the trees next to it. Generally, places where you have canopy cover that's touching, you can treat every other tree. There are no aerial applications for EAB. These are all ground treatments through injections, sprays, ground soaks, and there's a number of different formulations and application methods, but the efficacy of those varies. I'll touch on just one of those treatments. It's the one we tend to recommend the most. It's called emamectin benzoate, otherwise known as triage. And it has the greatest efficacy. It is the only treatment that's recommended on large diameter ash trees. It is also the most expensive, but it has a very long window of efficacy. So in treated trees with triage, you treat in year 1 and it kills the pest in year 1 and 2. And then there's a period of 2 years after that the tree kind of coasts along while new pests come along. And then you treat again in year 4. So you're only treating once every 4 years. And as time goes on, and as Colleen's graph showed, you have much lower levels of EAB after that initial wave, you can spread out that treatment window even longer. So utilizing insecticide treatment along with the biocontrol, targeted ash removal. This course of action is really designed to cost the least amount to a community, utilize the least amount of pesticide possible while protecting the greatest amount of your ash canopy cover as possible. Colleen showed this. This is a great resource. It talks about all of the different insecticide options, timing, and so forth. So I encourage you to take a look at that on our website. And Colleen spoke to this as well, where you're in the stage before EAB has arrived. It's a great opportunity to involve the public, to educate the public, to train volunteers and citizens to help us recognize this pest. That truly is our best defense against losing all of our ash at once. Again, we're looking for citizen scientists to help us monitor for the pests in locations near to known EAB infestations, both inside and outside the quarantine zones. We're looking for folks to help us conduct inventory, know what the resource is and where the pest is, to provide that best defense to help protect our ash and maintain it on the landscape within our communities and in our forests. So steps for a community in preparation, again, to conduct an inventory and assess your need for an emerald ash borer management plan. If you don't have much ash, then a plan may not be necessary, but it's also valuable to know what folks have in their backyards, because as a community, you're a resource to your citizens, and your citizens may need assistance with what they plan to do for management. Ideally, that plan should be cost effective with a clear, realistic vision of what you want your tree canopy to look like after EAB invasion. A solid plan will help ensure that you transition through the invasion on your terms and within your budget, and reduce the likelihood that you are put into a reactionary mode where you're just having to cut down trees that have been infested for many years and are potentially very dangerous at that point. And then lastly, to help the Maine Forest Service understand where EAB is by becoming one of our cooperators, either doing a girdled trap tree or volunteering to collect some insects in a green funnel trap. So that's what I have. I will stop sharing.
That was great, Jan. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. So I'm going to open it up to any questions. Along with that, if anyone wants to ask questions, I'm going to put in the chat now my contact information. If anything you wanted to recover over tonight's programming, whether you'd like me to get out with you or you want to participate in the trap tree program, feel free to reach out. I'm willing to work with folks over in this part of the state just to kind of help facilitate some of that. And I'm going to share the Oxford County Soil and Water Conservation District website again. I'd encourage you to follow them on Facebook as well. Just if you're interested in more of this type of programming on different subjects in the region, that's a great place to look. So, any questions?
I have a question.
Sure thing.
Yes, Mike. So my question is, and you've walked my woodlot. I've noticed that of all my hardwood trees, the ash seems to have a higher mortality. I don't think I have emerald ash borer. They're dying from something else. What are the other causes of ash tree mortality? And this, again, across the age groups as well. But some big ones, some small ones, they just die. What's going on?
Easy answer, and I'm not trying to pivot too much, but I think that's kind of the nature of ash in some cases. Some old ice storm damage oftentimes, looking back at the late 90s and throughout the 2000s, ice storm events could affect them. And then they get out competed on sites, I think. I don't think they're always well adapted. They like some richer soils that we might not have an abundance of, but I'll kind of look to the other two too to put in their sense of it. I know Colleen looks at a lot of ash trees, so.
I agree. It is so incredibly frustrating as an entomologist to go out, and I've been seeing this for a decade in Maine. All throughout Maine, there are places where ash is dying, and it shows all the symptoms of emerald ash borer. There's crown decline, and it's spreading, you know, all along the edge of a field or throughout a stand, and there's no real good answer. So yeah, some of the things that Mike mentioned, you know, old ice storm damage, and branches are broken off and fungus gets in, and a decade or 2 decades later, the trees start to die. Site issues, some of the drought years we've had recently has exacerbated some of those other issues. And so there probably are a whole bunch of multiple things. Ash is not, white ash is, I probably shouldn't say it's marginal here, but it doesn't take much sometimes to knock white ash down. And so I don't have a really good answer other than sort of what Mike said. There's a bunch of things that happen with them, and it's probably a combination of disease and site issues.
Thank you. Nope, thank you.
Sorry, no good answer.
That's fine. No, and your presentation was wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question, Mike.
Sure, go ahead, Merle.
I have 2 ash trees, both within 50 feet of a bird feeder, and they have moderate blonding, and the bird feeder attracts a lot of woodpeckers. Should there be a connection between that, or should I have those trees checked out? As far as I know, they're the only ash trees that have any blonding.
Yeah, I'm going to put that one to Colleen.
That's interesting. I doubt there is a connection with the bird feeder other than, you know, you may have more woodpeckers hanging around there. So if there is anything in those ash trees, they're going to go after them. So it's probably going to be just more incidental or coincidental. If that woodpecker feeding is low enough that you can get at it with a draw shave, it would be probably very helpful just to peel through it, like if you saw like in the video, that how if you peel through and the holes stop just partway through the bark, then you know it's not emerald ash borer. If the holes go all the way down to galleries in the cambium layer, then sending in a picture of the galleries that you see, I should be able to identify anything. If the woodpecker feeding is way high up in the tree, then there's not that much you can do, unless you want to put in a trap tree, or if at any point in time you fell that tree, peel the bark off and take a look at it. Because I can't tell just from looking at a tree whether that's whether those woodpeckers are feeding off of EAB or not EAB. You can basically tell just from the depth of the holes whether there's bark beetles or a wood borer. But other than that, I can't tell for sure. That's probably not a satisfying answer.
Well, all the blonding seems to be within 15 feet of the bottom of the tree, so I should be able to get to it.
Well, yeah, I would say take a closer look at it if you can.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Mike, I saw one in the chat
I just seen that too.
Michael McDonald asked, are there other towns that are doing ash EAB management plans? And yes, there are a handful of them. I certainly would love to see a lot more. Camden has a good one, and it made me think when I saw that question that in addition to our sample plan, it would be great if we could link to existing plans that are out there for other Maine communities. So I'll work on getting that up on our website.
And I see a question, how fast does EAB move naturally? Yes. When you take human beings out of the equation, EAB generally only moves about half a mile a year, maybe a mile a year on its own. It does not move really fast in general, because it's basically they will stay in the same tree or go to a neighboring tree. They don't fly really far because they don't have a reason to fly really far. So yeah, between half a mile, I've heard sometimes maybe up to 2 miles a year, but that's not very common. It's usually half a mile to 1 mile.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, okay. Yeah, just a comment. So again, I'd echo the comment. You guys did a great job. Thank you. That will conclude it for tonight. If you have any other questions going forward, please feel free to reach out to me. I put my contact there in the chat function. And then otherwise, you can find more information, not only the District Forester program, but also Jan's program of Project Canopy and the forest entomology work that Colleen's doing on the web. So thanks again, and have a good evening, everyone. Take care.
Thanks for being a good audience.
Thanks for coming.